going to jump into the book of Kings. So just like Samuel, we're going to deal with Kings as one book. So just kind of looking at it as a whole, although we'll keep mentioning 1st and 2nd Kings. A couple things. So first of all, let's think about times in our lives where we might have had our hopes dashed. I know it's such a positive way to start class. But I don't know, think about as a kid, like one of the big hope dashing moments for many kids is like you go to Santa and you ask for some amazing gift and you think you're going to get it, and then you wake up on Christmas morning and you run out to your living room and it's not there, right? And then you try to act like you're grateful for the gift you didn't want, right? That's one. Maybe fast forward a little bit to high school, and you gentlemen walk up to the girl of your dreams and you ask her out and she turns you down, so then you just like cry all the way back down the hall to your classroom. Or a little closer home, sometimes you go to apply to colleges and you don't get in the college you wanted, so then your hopes are dashed, right? So anyway, we could keep going. And here's the good news for you guys. As you get older, your hopes continue to get dashed. I mean, it's just life. It's how life works. But here's the deal. Why am I talking about such a positive subject on a Monday morning? Well, the reason is because 1st and 2nd Kings are going to do just that for us. They're going to dash our hopes. But they're going to dash our hopes in one regard, and that is in regard to our confidence in a king. So think about it. How have we had our hopes set up from Judges and Samuel regarding a king? Does anybody remember how Judges set our hopes up? Judges, though, remember Judges said what about a king? You remember that refrain at the end? It says, in those days there was no what in Israel? King Israel, so everyone did what was right in their own eyes. So what's the implication there? If we get a king, we might have some, basically like justice and righteousness. So that's one. Then we get to Samuel, and Samuel is really down on a king. However, by the time we leave Samuel, we are confident in what covenant? The Davidic covenant. So we're thinking, okay, this could be it. We keep moving forward. Remember, David ended Samuel by saying that his kingdom wasn't ideal, but that his hope is in the covenant. So it causes us to leave Samuel thinking, okay, let's look for this king. And then we get to Kings, and we're going to find out that we're going to have to keep looking because this book's not going to provide it for us. All right, so I've subtitled the book, The Road to Exile. If you remember, we've been talking about exile a while now. In fact, does anybody remember in this class the first time we specifically said that Israel would be exiled from their land? Does anybody remember the book? Do y'all want just a little hint? Like, it's the book that's always the right answer. Oh, close. No, it's better. What's the best book? Deuteronomy. Thank you. Deuteronomy. So Deuteronomy 28, Deuteronomy in several places. Moses, remember, he told the people, you're going to get in the land, and what's going to happen? You're going to rebel. God's going to send you into exile. So we've been watching since Deuteronomy, and now we're actually going to see it come to fruition in the book of Kings. In our class, we'll see it on Wednesday, but that's the book of Kings. All right, so let's jump in and talk about like the book, like we've been doing with these books. We're going to look at big themes, and then I'm going to just walk through some key events in the book. So let's talk about the major themes of Kings. I'll frame it this way. Anybody seen the Clint Eastwood Western, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly? Okay, like 3 people. That's good. Well, that phrase, the good and bad and ugly, I know you've heard that phrase. That comes from a Western. So I'm going to frame it good, bad, and ugly. These are the 3 themes. Okay, so when it comes to the good in Kings, does anybody want to take a shot at which group? Sorry, I can't talk. Let's restart. Which group of people are the good guys? And I've already given you a hint at which one it's probably not. So which group of people might be the good guys in Kings? Okay, ready? It's the prophets. So the good in Kings are the faithful prophets who are Yahweh's tools. Now we've seen prophets before, right? Who do we see in Samuel as a key prophet? Okay, thank you. I was hoping. Yes, Samuel is a prophet. Who else? What are some other prophets? Nathan. Is that what you're going to say? And Gad. There's one called Gad, lesser known. So we've seen prophets, but in Kings, the prophets are really going to become central figures as far as those who will follow Yahweh, speak truth to Israel while Israel is worshiping idols. So they're constantly calling the people back. They're constantly coming in and speaking to the kings. Okay? So Yahweh, faithful prophets is Yahweh's tools. Okay, who are the bad? Office-wise, the kings. The book of Kings shows us the failure of Israel's kings. Now let me just say this. It's not that every king was bad. We'll see some good ones. But for the most part, the kings as a whole fail in their role to help the people. And then the third and final one is the ugly. Oh, you can get is going to be curses for disobedience. You guys remember the curses that we talked about in Deuteronomy 28? If you get in the land you obey, you'll be blessed. If you get in the land, you'll disobey and you'll be cursed. Does anybody remember the nature of those curses? They're opposite of blessings. And in Israel's context, it all involves like fertility, right? Of crops and cattle and even wives. And then remember, the ultimate curse is the one we just talked about, and that's the exile. So that's the icing on the cake that we'll get. All right, everybody good? So here's the game plan today. We're really just going to spend most of the day on Solomon. So let's talk real quick about King Solomon. Very familiar biblical character, right? Solomon's reign has been termed the golden age in Israel because he follows his dad David, and he extends the borders. Solomon's borders are the most expansive region that Israel ever knew. Also, the prosperity of Solomon's reign and the peace that the people enjoyed is unheard of in the Old Testament, okay, because of Solomon. So really important figure. Now, we could talk about a lot, but let's start by talking about just his two major achievements, okay? So let's talk about wisdom first, and we'll go there. So first of all, it's wisdom. So in 1 Kings chapter 3, Solomon is worshiping Yahweh at a high place. More on that to come. And as he's worshiping, God appears to him and basically gives Solomon a blank check. Now, as good Americans, if somebody gave us a blank check, what are we asking for? Money, yes. We're asking for money. Most of the time, we'd say, just give me like $1 million. I'd be happy. So we're asking for money. And that wasn't even a possibility for Solomon, right? But instead, what does he ask for? He asks for wisdom. And it's important he asked for wisdom so that he could rule God's people. So it was an interesting request for wisdom. So God gives him a buy one, get two free. So he gets wisdom, and what else does God give him in top of that? Because he didn't ask for these two things. Riches and honor. Yeah, so he gives him riches and honor, i.e. fame, we might say, as a result of that. So just to show you how wise Solomon was, I just have a verse here. It says, and God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure, and breadth of mind like the sand on the seashore. And then it says, and people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon. So again, we see this very common metaphor of sand on the seashore. The point of that is to say you can't count it. So in other words, his wisdom was mind-blowing, like it was off the charts. But look at the second verse I put up there. It says, people of all nations came to hear him. What should that call our minds to, this idea of all the nations coming to hear Solomon's wisdom? So here's the deal. It seems like all the nations are coming to Solomon to hear his wisdom. So Solomon is almost in this sense functioning as God intended Israel to function. By his wisdom, he's blessing these nations as they listen to his wisdom. So again, scholars might say that we get a little foretaste here in Solomon's reign of what God's ultimate intention was for his people. That is, that they would be a blessing. Now, most famous of all would be a queen, by the queen from where? Sheba, Queen of Sheba, who comes down. So yes, so we see Solomon's wisdom. By the way, this is setting us up for something we're going to talk about at the end of next week. And that is Solomon's wisdom leaves his fingerprints all over which books in the Old Testament? Proverbs. That's right. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs, which are what we call the wisdom books. And so we're actually going to talk about the wisdom books, I think, next Wednesday or Friday, because we're off this Friday. So, all right, so that's his wisdom. Now let's talk about his really, really important claim to fame, and that is the temple. So coming off the last class, remember God had said to David, your son, one from your offspring, will build a house for me. And again, this many people would interpret this as the fulfillment, or at least the initial fulfillment of that promise. So let's just do a visual instead of doing bullet points. So here is a picture or the diagram of the temple. Again, keep in mind it's a cutaway, so it actually would have had a wall on this side. And just a few things to point out. We have you can see, first of all, it's a major upgrade from the tabernacle, where you have a tent and a portable privacy fence, right? For this one, it's a permanent structure built in Jerusalem, and kind of the highest point on the central mountain there. You see over here we have the altar burnt offering, which is where they would offer their daily burnt offerings morning and evening. Do y'all remember the tabernacle diagram I showed you, where there was that little basin where they washed in? Now you can see they've got these rolling carts with these little basins all around for the same reason. But then they also had this monster water thing here called the sea, S-E-A. They actually called it the sea. It held 12,000 gallons of water. Yeah. So, and you can see that it sat on top of 12 oxen. So just a massive kind of water storage unit there that they would have had. As you look at the main structure of the temple, what do you notice? What are some things? Does anything pop out at you? Lots of gold. Good. So the gold, twofold reason for gold. One, it's fit for a king. So this is Yahweh's royal residence as the king. Second, it draws our minds back to where? The garden, right? Because in the garden, it mentions this land of Havilah that one of the rivers went around where there was gold. Can you guys tell what's on the walls all down the side of the temple? Can y'all see that from that far? Did you?
Those are plants.
Yes, trees. Yes, that's exactly right. So the walls are lined with palm trees. And then these two big pillars here at the entrance of the temple, if you look at the top, those are the decorative part at the top is called the capital. And the capital of the temple, they're designed to look like pomegranate trees. So do you see this? You got two pomegranates sitting there as you walk in. You walk in, and both walls are lined with rows of trees. What's it making you feel like you're walking into? A garden, right? If you go back to Genesis, all the trees of the garden were good for food and pleasant to the sight. So this is what so you can see here this garden imagery, which we could keep rolling with that. Which way is it facing? He built it facing which direction? East. Thank you, because it's east. Like the garden faced east, the tabernacle faced east. Also, this first room here is the holy place where the priest did their daily service. And then here's our Holy of Holies. Again, I'm about to show you a diagram of the Ark of the Covenant, but you see the two really monster cherubim that basically their wings span the entire Holy of Holies. Again, cherubim in the ancient world were guardians of sacred space, and also they were known as heavenly beings, and so they're like the cherubim in the garden. They're guarding the holy place in there. Okay, so major echoes of the garden. But here's the other thing: it just doesn't look backwards to the garden. But what it also does is, in one sense, pulls the garden into the story to show us that God is basically trying to restore what was in the garden in the midst of his people Israel. Okay? All right, let me show you one other thing about this, and this is the most important aspect of the temple. This is a diagram of the Holy of the Ark of the Covenant, which sat in the Holy of Holies. As you look at it, first of all, notice there's two. First of all, it's what? Made out of what? Gold, thank you. The closer you got to God's presence, it had to be pure gold. Two poles here that the Levites would carry the ark with. Although once it gets in the temple, there's not much carrying anymore, because remember, they needed those poles for the tabernacle as they moved. But the temple becomes a very permanent structure. If you look at the top, you see there's a lid, and then you have the two cherubim there bowing down. And this gives us a better look at cherubim because cherubim would have been like a hybrid creature. So they have a body like a lion, wings like an eagle, and a face like a human. And these were not unique to Israel. We found archaeologists have found these in like reliefs in Assyria, all through Mesopotamia. Okay, so they were a common feature of the ancient world. And please hear me, this is not a sarcastic question. What are they bowing down to? And usually when you bow down, what are you bowing down to is above you. What are they bowing down to? God. Okay, God, yes, but like, is God physically there? Physically. So this is important. They're bowing down to physically nothing. And this is why in Israel they could not have images of Yahweh. So this is the second commandment. So it's kind of like I've heard somebody describe it as a frame without a picture. What they're bowing down to is they're bowing down to symbolize that God is present, but there is no physical form there. All of Israel's neighbors, if they thought God was present, there would be a physical image there. But in Israel, that would not have been the case. And so that's why the ark is oftentimes in the Bible, it's called Yahweh's dwelling place. It's called his footstool. So the image is he dwells and his feet rest on the ark. And so the ark is why it's so associated with the presence of Yahweh. The only other thing I think, in the ark, what would they have? That's a lid. It's called the mercy seat. If they take the lid off, what's in it? Yeah, the Ten Commandments, the Aaron's staff that buzz, and then the manna. Yeah. Which manna means, have I said this before in this class? Y'all know what manna means? It means, what is it? So they walk up and they see the stuff on the ground and they say, what is it? And that's its name. What is it? So, hey, pass me some what is it? I mean, that's what it means in Hebrew, so it's a nameless thing. All right, again? Okay, so here's the deal. Solomon finishes the temple. Does anybody know what happens in 1 Kings 8 when he finishes the temple? I know. The glory of God, the cloud of God descends on it. So much so that no one can enter the temple. So just imagine a cloud descending upon it and filling it up with God's glory, which is the same thing that happened, by the way, with the tabernacle. So the glory of God fills the temple to demonstrate, to show the people that God has chosen this place and he is dwelling with his people in their midst. So just a glorious day. Well, you guys know the rest of the story is everything wasn't always glorious with Solomon. So now let's switch gears from what he did really well to maybe not so well. And I want you on this one to do a small group. But here's the point. I want you to read two passages. So the first one is Deuteronomy 17, 14 through 20. This is called the laws for the king. And then the second passage, if you've been reading along like according to the course schedule, this was, you probably already read this one. But if not, then make sure you read 1 Kings 10, 14 through 11, 8. And here's what I want you to do. You're going to take the laws for the king, read the king's passage, and give Solomon a grade. How well did he do on the laws for the kings? Everybody got it? Discuss it. Would you guys agree with this? That we think he's all good, like really good, until the very end, and then he just falls off a cliff in chapter 11 when we're told his heart's turned away when he's old. Yeah. All right. So, but I think for many people, it's like good, and cliff with the wives. Okay. So, hopefully you saw how reading these laws might change kind of how you view Solomon. So but I want to show you how this is not just this story, but this is how the whole Bible works. So I want to introduce you to a commercial I saw a few years ago. Okay, so I was watching the Super Bowl. What year was this? I think it was like 2013 maybe. I don't know, sometime a while back. And there was this Honda CR-V commercial that I'm about to actually show you. But like everybody, I was watching the Super Bowl to see the commercials. And so this commercial came on. And I saw it, and I said, oh, that's a really cool commercial. And then I'm going to let you watch it, and I'll explain what happened after that. I saw this commercial, and I was like, that's a cool commercial. This guy skips work, fakes sick, drives a Honda CR-V. It's fun. I come to class the next morning because Super Bowl's on a Sunday, Worldview 1, talking to my students, and they're like, that commercial was based on a movie, right? And all you know what movie? Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And apparently, confession, I told my students, like, well, that was probably like 6, 7 years ago that I watched the movie, and I still haven't watched the movie. I need to watch the movie. So as someone who's, oh, good, I got a kindred spirit. As somebody who's never seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off, that was just a cool commercial. But if you've seen the movie, apparently that thing, every scene is modeled after the movie, correct? Yeah, it's the whole movie, right? Okay, there we go. Like, in other words, every scene is playing off of the movie. And here's the deal. If you notice, if I were to go back to the beginning of the movie, the producers of that commercial didn't put a notice at the first of the commercial to say, notice, if you have not seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off, you will not get this commercial. They just assumed that enough people, obviously I would not be in that category, in our culture had seen the movie that they would automatically get it. They assumed cultural knowledge in order to get the commercial. All right, now here, why do I show this commercial? It took 2 minutes, man, that's a lot of time. The reason I show this and describe this is this is most often than not what the biblical writers are doing. Later biblical authors are assuming our knowledge of earlier biblical stories. And I would argue that in Kings, especially in Solomon's story, that the biblical author of Kings is assuming your knowledge of Deuteronomy 17, the laws for the kings. Does that make sense? So now let's talk about our group project, the group discussion. So how did you guys grade him out? I think it's important to see that there is a tension between how we view Solomon. And that even though the narrative waits until the very end to tell us about all his wives and how they turned his heart when he was old, which is why they wait to the narrative waits to the end, that what's happening if we go back through the narrative is, and we read it in light of this law and some other laws in Deuteronomy, we see that maybe Solomon wasn't as glorious as we initially thought, but he's also, we don't write him off because there is a mix of good and bad. And so here's how the way I like to capture it. Is the book of Kings, the author of Kings, by drawing on those laws from the Kings out of Deuteronomy and one other one, he shows us that Solomon's heart is divided. So he gives us what we might call hint a divided heart. And then these hints, so to speak, come out, and by the end, when he falls off the cliff, so to speak, we're like, oh, it kind of exploded on him at the end, if we think of it that way. So let me give you a few other hints in the text of a divided heart, and I'll close by looking at those laws for the kings. So the first one is, the first thing Solomon does when he takes over reign is he marries Pharaoh's daughter in 1 Kings 3. Now, why might that be a possible hint of a divided heart? He would have probably married her for a political alliance with Egypt, right? And what we will see through the biblical story, we have already seen it. We haven't talked about it much in the class, but usually, why does God forbid Israel not to marry foreign women? Because they have idols, and they'll turn his people to their idols. So if you remember in Judges, this happened to Samson. So usually, when an Israelite man marries a foreign woman, it doesn't go well. Okay. So that's one hint. The second hint is in 1 Kings 3, when he is worshiping Yahweh, he's worshiping on the high places. Okay, so you're like, what's wrong with the high places? We go back to Deuteronomy 7 and 12. Moses commanded Israel that when they get into the land, they're supposed to destroy all the Canaanite high places. And they're not supposed to worship Yahweh like the Canaanites worship their God. Okay, another strike. We could also maybe mention the fact that his house, he took almost twice as long to build his personal palace as he did to the temple. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean anything's wrong, but again, these are hints that he might have a divided heart. And then if we look at it from the laws of the kings, we see check, 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 right? The greatest check mark being the wives, okay? And the horses. By the way, why are horses, does God not like horses? So why does God forbid horses for the kings? It was a symbol of military might. They pulled chariots, then you have cavalry. I mean, horses were a big deal. So, in other words, he didn't want the king to depend on his military might. He wanted the king to depend on him. Yeah. Same way with the riches. And then the wives, we're about to see. The wives, the forbidding on the wives was because of turning their heart away. So, this brings us to the end of his reign and the cliff. And here's the cliff. This might be, by the way, one of the greatest understatements in the history of humankind. Right here. He loved many foreign women. That's an understatement, right? Many might be a little too low for him. He loved tons of foreign women. Again, here we go. Ancient world, the size of a king's harem was, again, a symbol of power and strength. Power and strength. So it was, think of it more as a status symbol. But here's the important thing. The ones he did know, what did they do to his heart? They turned his heart from Yahweh. That's the emphasis of chapter 11. So that he began to build idols to those gods so that his wives could worship them. So therefore, God then brings punishment to Solomon. And you need to know this punishment. What is the punishment that he brings as a result of Solomon turning away? You might know. He tells Solomon that he is going to tear the kingdom away from whom? Not Solomon, but Solomon's son. So in other words, basically he's going to lose the kingdom. But if you remember, what did the Davidic covenant say about God disciplining the son? Do you remember from what you read this on Friday in class? But he basically said he would not remove his loving kindness from David's line as he did from Saul. So this is why even in the midst of punishment, we see mercy. Okay, and the mercy is this. Well, actually, you guys guessed. But the other one is God said he would leave one tribe for Solomon. This is Solomon's son, for Solomon's son. So in other words, what we're about to see when we come back on Wednesday is God's going to rip the kingdom away from Solomon's son, but he's going to leave Solomon's son reigning over one tribe, which, by the way, sets us up to see the fulfillment of which covenant? The Davidic covenant. And by the way, the reason he shows mercy is for the sake of David. Do you think this is talking about David as a person? What do you think it means by for the sake of David? The covenant, yeah. So remember, we ended Samuel by David saying, my hope and my salvation is in this everlasting covenant he's made with me. And so now when Solomon is judged and he receives his punishment, the mercy shown is, again, for the sake of David. And I would argue that's the covenant promises. So that's the way that, by leaving one tribe with Solomon, that allows God to keep his promise to have a Davidic king on the throne in Jerusalem. All right, so top of that.